Welcome to the Digital Planning Podcast. This series is designed to educate individuals about all things digital in connection with estate planning, business planning, and estate administration. To keep up with all things digital, please subscribe at iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you download your podcasts. And now, Jennifer Ziegel, a partner at Kleinbart LLC, Ross Bruck, a principal of Estate Genie, and Justin Brown, a partner at Pepper Hamilton LLP, with today's topic.
Welcome back to the Digital Planning Podcast. I'm your co-host, Jen, and Ross and Justin, my other co-hosts, are with me today, and we have a very special guest. He's actually our first guest on the Digital Planning Podcast, my friend who is also an entrepreneur and the founder and CEO of Liberty Fox Technologies, Bill Evans. Now, Liberty Fox Technologies is a technology consulting firm with a national presence. Liberty Fox provides its clients with cutting-edge technological solutions, app and software development, as well as consulting on blockchain technology. Bill is a frequent speaker on the topics of blockchain technology, and we're very lucky that he's joining us today. Thank you so much for coming on our show, Bill. We're very happy to have you.
Thanks, Jen. I appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
So can you tell us a little bit about your background in technology?
Sure. I have been playing around in technology as long as I can remember, back to being a kid. I think I started dabbling with my first computer when I was 7 or 8 years old, started writing software when I was 12 or 13, and started my company at 24. So wow. I can honestly tell you that I have been playing around as long as I can remember. I've always been fascinated by what computers do and what they're capable of.
So how did you get interested in blockchain technology?
I was actually doing some research on the dark web. We don't necessarily do cybersecurity, but I need to be aware of cybersecurity for my clients. And in listening to a few Audible books, I knew of Bitcoin and I knew of cryptocurrency, but not really deep. And while doing that research on the dark web, I started to learn a lot more about it and its applications outside of that. And then I kind of took the red pill and started reading all the books about it. I've been aware of this space since about 2012, got really excited about it in like 2014, 2015.
So I know you do a lot of blockchain consulting for companies. What does that actually entail?
Well, it's kind of a bit of a three-part process. We do education, consultation, and implementation. So the first part, the education aspect, is all the speeches I go out and do. A lot of companies and people from those companies don't necessarily know what the technology really is and how it applies to them. So my speech is focused around blockchain and practical applications so that you can understand where it's going to be in the next few years and how it might apply to your business. Companies that listen to that and are, okay, wow, that really does apply to me, then we move into a consultation phase where we'll actually go through and look at what a real application would look like for them. And if that is truly a viable path forward, that's where we move into implementation.
You must see a lot of false positives. Companies who think, wow, blockchain technology is so cool, I want that, and it doesn't actually apply.
100%. In fact, I'd say over 90% of my inbound blockchain leads are people who are excited about a new technology and it doesn't necessarily apply to them. One of the most important things I try to teach people about blockchain and how it applies to their environments is it's not something where you'd actually build a minimum viable product. It's something where you need a minimum viable environment. The whole value of a blockchain is that data and information about assets is transferred from the beginning of origin to the end where it is now. And if you don't have all the players involved in that process or that supply chain on board with what you're trying to do, then developing that blockchain is not necessarily a viable solution. Doesn't mean you don't have a problem. Doesn't mean that we can't help you. But it doesn't necessarily mean that blockchain is your solution.
So are you seeing any trends with startups in this space where blockchain is appropriate?
Yeah, there's a lot of different spaces. I mean, one of the things I talk about in my slides are that there are over 50 real-world use cases with large companies and startups. One of the startups I find interesting is a company called Propy. They started outside the United States and now they're moving into the U.S. They're actually looking to simplify the real estate transaction market. They want to bring it down to only 5 parties: the seller, the seller's bank, the buyer, the buyer's bank, and the title control, which would be the government in that case. That might sound a bit lofty, but they've already sold a couple houses in the United States and quite a few internationally. There's another company that I find interesting as well called VinChain, and they're looking to simplify the process of transferring vehicles, right? Why is it that in 2019 I have to agree with you on the price of a car, and then we both have to drive to a title insurance place and hope that they're open, and not title insurance, I'm sorry, title transfer, hope that they're open and go through that whole process. So VinChain's actually working with a government agency called AMVA to actually simplify that to the point that I may be able to sell you my car through my cell phone someday. So there's a lot of really interesting startups. As far as the verticals, the biggest verticals that I see are anything that's involving in a supply chain. Those are the industries that are like really excited to move. Healthcare is excited too, but in a more international sector, the United States is much slower to move in the healthcare space. So in the international healthcare space, we've definitely seen some traction as far as control of electronic medical records and how it's shared.
So in terms of your clients, are you working on any interesting projects right now that you can talk about?
All across the board. We have a client right now in the electronic medical record space. They actually did a pilot in Estonia and are working in Australia. Their goal is to actually, kind of move the international market first and then come after the U.S. market. We also had another client that's looking at storing the rights to intellectual property on a blockchain to support brokering IP that is not necessarily patented. And we've had other clients that are looking to do crypto gambling apps, everything from sports betting to actually betting on the trends of cryptocurrency. So really a lot of volatility across the board. The ones that are really gaining a lot of traction, like I mentioned before, in the supply chain space, those are the ones that are a lot more vetted and looking to make big differences in their space.
A lot of our listeners are in the trust and estates world. Have you seen anything, any ideas approaching blockchain use in that realm?
There's a lot going on there. The fintech area of blockchain and cryptocurrency is unique because you see a lot of pushback from the SEC and the IRS. But the interesting thing too with the SEC is they've actually straight up said, we're not against cryptocurrency. We're against people being hurt and taken advantage of by the simplicity of that happening. So they're very open to changing those things. As far as how it's being used for estates and things like that, there's a lot of companies that are experimenting with the concepts of smart contracts being able to trigger based on an event at a certain time. If the event occurs outside of the blockchain, that goes through a thing called an oracle. And the oracle is nothing more than a data point that causes an action to occur. So in that space, especially with like auditing and stuff, you can actually control who can see your assets, who can see when you've moved your assets, and I may be able to have full visibility between two parties, but then I can also share partial visibility with an auditing party so that auditing can occur whenever it needs to, as opposed to every time they demand such.
So let's jump back for one quick second. You mentioned Propy, you mentioned the 5 players that they have involved. One of them was a government entity, and that seems like the biggest hurdle to get over, right? Because you need to get a legislative body or an administrative body on board with using and comfortable with using blockchain.
Certainly, that's a good point. Even when I mentioned VinChain as well, VinChain's smart in the sense that they're going after the government agency. A private agency that works very closely with the government called AMVA. They do the title transfers between states. So, that's one of the things that I always talk about is the fact that, you need to get these government agencies on board. A lot of your very hyper crypto enthusiasts and utopians talk about how it's going to change the world and everything like that, but legislation needs to follow. And for example, in the real estate space, if the government's not going to be open to allowing this to be reduced to 5 parties and be a part of that process, then that is going to be a hurdle. People always talk about how the fact that title insurance could be completely gone if blockchain works, right? Like that's one of the biggest use cases I hear all the time. But what I don't hear people saying is, hey, the only way that will actually work is if the government only recognizes property liens that are on the blockchain. And as long as property liens can be recorded outside of the blockchain, it does not have the value that everybody is so excited about. So, I'm a very big proponent of seeing that legislation move forward, and there are certain states that are moving faster than others. For example, the state of Ohio is very much looking into storing birth certificates on the blockchain, and therefore you couldn't necessarily create a fake identity in Ohio after that. The state of Delaware has created a joint venture with the SEC called the ERC 884 token, and that allows them to track actually track shareholders of organizations on a blockchain. They finished their proof of concept and they're looking to roll that out to a real scenario. So certain states are moving faster than others, and the federal is not far behind them.
You mentioned the birth certificates on blockchain. I always thought that a death certificate on the blockchain when somebody dies, to have that as a centralized ledger where that can just be marked, and all the parties that rely on the death certificate, which is a lot, to have that as a resource where everyone looks to, could be a really efficient use of that.
Absolutely, and I can't imagine that they wouldn't look at it that way. I mean, at least in a digital sense, a birth certificate can also be a death certificate. In the digital asset representation of it. Because I mean, I don't pretend to remember the statistic, but I do know that a lot of dead people file millions of dollars of tax returns a year. And this is a step in that right direction. Remember, a blockchain can't necessarily stop a nefarious party from putting bad data in the system, but it can stop them from putting it in the system 30 years ago. So it doesn't mean that I couldn't find a way to put a fake identity into Ohio, but it does mean that I couldn't pretend that I was 35 years old or whatever the age, because the blockchain does not allow you to go back and retroactively add data. You can only add it to the top.
So logistically, if a state was going to implement, and we can say death certificate or birth certificate, if they're going to implement that kind of technology, blockchain technology to house that information, how would that work? How would that be rolled out? Would that be done on an ongoing basis, or would that be retroactive to everything in their system?
That is a great question. What you typically would see is a pancaked pile of records that would serve as the origin, which is all the history, and then from that point forward, the protection would occur. So once all that data is entered in an origin format, then all of that would be everything they've ever had would have to be migrated to the system. But they also could set it up in a way that they don't necessarily put everything in. They could say from this point forward, anybody born in 2020 and beyond is protected by the blockchain. The same thing applies in the title space. They talk about, for example, if the government was on board with it, you'd still have to honor liens and everything that occurred prior to that date. So, for example, if they rolled out blockchain in title in 2020, you'd have to wait out the statute of limitations of things like liens that were not through the blockchain before the house would be truly protected, unless it was brand new construction, in which case it would start immediately. So, going back to things like that, where you have to load the data originally, it all just comes down to what their use case is and how they want to implement that. But ultimately, it's not much more complicated than how they do electronic data interchange today, or EDI, which is very, very common between companies. I look at this as like EDI in the 21st century kind of a thing, because instead of I have to integrate with you, you have to integrate with me, she has to integrate with you, and so on, we all have all this integration web. Instead, we each integrate with the blockchain one time, and then we are automatically integrated with everybody else who's sharing that chain with us.
So, Bill, earlier on you mentioned cryptocurrencies. Are you a crypto enthusiast?
I am. I don't blatantly go around talking about it, but yes. I started investing in cryptocurrencies in late 2015, early 2016. So even with the crazy market today, I'm still in pretty good shape. But it is an interesting market. It's very volatile. I like to think that it does in months what the stock market does in years. It's a fun ride, but it's something you have to be very diligent about, and I would not recommend investing in it if you weren't already doing your traditional alternatives first.
Do you have any favorite coins?
Oh yeah, sure. There's many different ones that serve many different purposes. I'm always a big fan of the big players out there. I mean, arguably Bitcoin is technically the worst coin because it was the first coin, right? So every cryptocurrency that has existed after Bitcoin was designed to fix something that Bitcoin didn't solve on its own. But at the same time, it has also evolved, and it also has the largest backing, and I don't think it's necessarily going to be gone any day soon. But there are other ones that are really exciting. For example, there's one called Ripple, which is a partially centralized coin that is getting a lot of traction in the fintech space. A lot of the banks and everything are looking to replace their SWIFT network, which is a very antiquated system, with this Ripple network, and they're all working on that together. There's other coins like Ethereum, which has been out for a long time, that I really like. That was one of the first coins to implement a concept called smart contracts, which we just talked about, allowing automatic arbitration and automatic asset transfer based on trigger events and things like that. And then there's other really in the weeds ones, like one called IOTA, which is designed for the Internet of Things and doesn't even use blockchain. It runs on a concept called entanglement. So there's a really large plethora. I think there's over 3,000 coins out there, and everyone's trying to solve a different problem.
10 years from now, do you think that there'll be one winner and one crypto that wins out, and that we'll look back and say, oh, well, that was clearly the obvious choice from the beginning? or do you think there'll always be a need for various cryptos to do different things?
I think that we're going to see a culling of the 3,000+ we have today, but I don't think we're ever going to get down to one to rule them all, because I think that there's reasons that different ones solve different purposes. For example, Ripple is totally designed to be partially centralized. So if you're looking for a decentralization, which some people are, Ripple is not a good choice. But if you're a bank that needs to maintain some level of control, Ripple is. And sometimes you just need straight asset transfer, which is why things like Bitcoin work really well. So do I think we're going to see a reduction in coins over time? Sure. But if you look at them like a Starbucks gift card or a Target gift card, like, why do we have gift cards when we have cash? Just because it's something that's convenient, that serves a purpose for a particular reason. And I think you'll see that with crypto. The one thing I always say too is, some people are saying, oh, well, do you think cryptocurrency is going to replace cash? No, because if you truly think about it, no form of financial transfer that we've ever invented has actually replaced the one before it, right? Cash didn't replace coins, checks didn't replace cash, credit cards didn't replace checks. And then, PayPal and Venmo didn't replace that, and now cryptocurrency is not going to replace that. It's just we add to these different things because there's different ways that make more sense to use that kind of transfer mechanism.
But you're bullish on the idea of merchants and businesses accepting cryptos in the future?
Absolutely. I mean, right now you can pay you can go to a vendor and pay them at least 4 or 5 different ways. They would be naive to not accept one more way if it opened up another market of people who want to work that way. It's a digital asset class that allows you to have the flexibility and anonymity of making cash transactions, but the simplicity and ease of use of a digital or credit style transaction. So for some people who are looking for that blend being pseudonymity, provides them a path forward that has that convenience factor, but that decision to do what you want with it factor.
So I'm a tax attorney, so when you say you can pay these vendors with these cryptocurrencies, I immediately go to, okay, what are the tax consequences of doing that? So when you get this cryptocurrency, you have a basis. You bought it for something. And then when you pay somebody like Starbucks, you're essentially selling your cryptocurrency. So there's a gain of some sort, correct?
Yes, or a loss, because it's a very volatile market. But yes, absolutely. There is a gain or loss definitely occurs. It is spot pricing. The IRS does fully acknowledge that is extremely complicated, and there's a lot of people who legitimately want to pay their taxes properly, and even their accountants are like, I don't know what to do to help you right now. The truth is that this is, I don't want to say that this is unprecedented, that's not true, but the simplicity at which to transact with spot pricing in this capacity has just not been realized down to the consumer level like this. And therefore the IRS is revisiting their 2012 statement of this being, property transfer and purchasing and stuff like that, because they realize that the complexities are there. That accountants are like, I don't even know how to help my client here. So it is a real problem, and it is something that the government is aware of, and they're really just right now when they are going after people, they're going after people who are very obviously maliciously taking advantage of it. The average consumer is more than often just getting like a notice and a warning to please kind of work through the solution. And I think that the government will probably have that figured out in a couple of years. It's not going to be something that's going to happen tomorrow, but they are actively working on their legislation.
Is there any kind of reporting in any way from a tax perspective?
It totally comes down to how you choose to transact in your cryptocurrency. So you can choose to transact completely off the grid, using just strictly on the blockchain itself, in which case you're not going through an intermediary like an exchange or something like that. If you do transact that way, then it is completely on you. The same as cash. If I was to transact in cash, it's up to me to report to the government what I did with that cash. So if you choose to act in that way, you have to have the same diligence as working in cash. If you go through an exchange like Coinbase or many of the other options that are out there, a lot of them are maintaining your transaction history for you and helping you understand to some capacity, even going as far as issuing 1099s where relevant.
So something that you had said earlier on when we were talking about birth certificates and death certificates and how they're all part of a blockchain and we can all have access to the blockchain. In these consumer type transactions where there's gains or losses on the disposition of cryptocurrencies, and this is theoretical, if the IRS was a part of this blockchain, would that solve the reporting requirement?
Great question. Blockchains can be divided up into primarily three different silos. You have public, permissioned, and private. So a private blockchain you would have to give the IRS access into, whereas a public blockchain, they already have the right to see everything. So if you wanted them to either help you or review, they would just need to know what your wallet ID is, the equivalent of your bank account number. It's not tied back to your name, so that's that pseudonymity aspect. You also don't have to go to a central authority to receive a wallet ID. So you can generate it on your own, which is, again, why you have pseudonymity. But if you're trying to stay above board and you just want to make sure that you're dotting all of your I's and crossing all your T's, then as long as you know what wallets you own and what wallets you've worked with, that audit history is completely in the blockchain. And we've actually worked with a couple accounting firms to actually allow them to collect their wallet IDs from their customers, and then we were able to write some code to go through, retrieve all the transaction history, compare it to the spot price that day, and help them produce that very report that they need.
We talked a little bit about merchants and companies accepting crypto. Is that going on right now at all?
Certainly. Worldwide, I think there's over 50,000 vendors that accept cryptocurrency. And now, more recently, through the Winklevoss twins, there's an application called Flexa that they're working with, and their Gemini exchange, to allow many merchants to be able to transact in cryptocurrency. And even if that merchant's afraid of it and they don't want it, the benefit of this application is that the moment that person transacts, they immediately get it in the fiat currency of their choice. So that most recent announcement with Flexa actually announced like Whole Foods, Starbucks, and many other of our preferred retailers. I think they've even mentioned Nordstrom are going to be on that list. And then there's many more that are willing to just take cryptocurrency natively. I mean, one of the most outspoken retailers that loves cryptocurrency is Overstock.com. They have previously taken cryptocurrency, and they're working on actually building out a fully decentralized exchange now. So it all comes down to the retailer's comfort level with the new technology.
Now, for users who are utilizing, those types of applications to buy and sell goods with cryptocurrencies, the tax obligations and reporting requirements are still going to be on the burden of the user.
Sure. Again, it comes down to as if you mowed somebody's lawn and got some cash, and it's up to you to transact on that. So, again, a lot of these tools and applications are creating easier and better ways to export that data so that you can hand it over to your accountant and have that process taken care of. But yes, ultimately, 100% is on the end user.
And, just as an aside for our listeners, the tax treatment of virtual currencies right now is classified by the IRS as intangible personal property. So it's going to follow that type of income tax and capital gains tax treatment depending on the activities.
Thank you for joining us for part 2 of our exploration of the blockchain technology. In part 3, we're going to continue our conversation with Bill Evans, so look for that to be posted soon.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Digital Planning Podcast, the podcast designed to educate individuals about all things digital in connection with estate planning, business planning, and estate administration. Please subscribe to this podcast and leave us a rating or review at iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you download your podcasts. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.